This is going to be spoiler full. So just a heads up. Hello everybody, it's Charlie. I just watched the second episode of Moon Knight, and now that I've seen a little bit more of it, I'd like to give a kind of first impressions thing, and I think that I'll continue to do this throughout the show. So let's talk about a few things from the new Marvel movies, not movie series, TV series, Moon Knight. Now I'm going to preface this with the fact that I don't know anything about the original comics. I don't know anything about Moon Knight. I'm not going to be explaining like the plot or anything here or how it compares to that. I'm sure you can find that elsewhere, and I'm not the person to talk about that. But I can talk about DID, its representation of DID, and my opinions on it. For anyone who's here who doesn't know who I am or much about DID but is here because they are interested in Moon Knight, let's talk about it real quick overview. DID forms from a child who experienced repetitive abuse before the ages of 7 to 9 and had a high capacity to dissociate. And someone who had these traumatic things repetitively happening and developed structural amnesia to separate those traumatic things from their daily life, so they were able to live a normal daily life without huge amounts of fear and without huge amounts of conflict related to that trauma. And then there was a different part of them that was separated by that amnesia who experienced that and was able to survive the trauma. There's a lot more to DID than that, but alters in a system all exist to keep the system alive. And because the person who was there or the people who were already there in the system did not have the capacity to handle whatever trauma was going on at that time. So a new altar was created, a new amnesia sector was cordoned off. And over time, systems tend to try to work to lower those amnesia barriers, but you don't realize that you have it until later in life. My name's Charlie. I am the host of our system. We talk about DID. We are professionally diagnosed. We talk about it on this channel. Check us out. We also talk on TikTok. I'm saying all this with the recognition that my opinions on representation in the media are very different sometimes than a lot of the rest of the community. For example, we know that our community despises Split and Glass and the way that our community has been represented in that. I honestly, the thing that bothers me is the fact that there isn't other representation. The fact that the main representation for us is a horror movie. And most of the representation, if not all of the representation in mainstream media, has the murderer alter, the evil one, the person trying to use as an excuse in court. I don't have an issue with Split. I wish that we lived in a world where Split could exist and it could be fine. It's just that there's not other stuff because it has the context of it's a horror movie. But when your only representation is horror, it's not great. So I recognize that our community might not have quite as positive of a reaction to Moon Knight as I do, because there are aspects. There is an alter who commits murder. That's a big yikes for representation, but also it's a superhero movie. Everyone in superhero movies murders people. It's just kind of how they work. So I'm viewing this in that context. One of the things that I like the most with our current understanding from only being 2 episodes in is what we learned about halfway through this episode, the second one, where I forget his name, but like cult leader guy. He was talking about so Mark, there's Steven, who's the host, and then there's Mark, and then Mark is an avatar for the Egyptian god Khonshu. I went into this expecting it to be, there's a DID system, one of the altars has superpowers. That is shitty representation, and we've seen before and kind of sucks. It's a choice that like wouldn't inherently make this piece of media bad, but I think our whole community was like, please don't be that. And this isn't that, which I am actually really happy about. And basically what we learned is that guy, the cult leader guy, was like, Khonshu chose Mark and chose you, like this body, to be his avatar because he knew you were already broken, which, like, that terminology, not great, but also people's terminology towards DID isn't great in real life, and people treat us as broken, and this is like the bad guy potentially who's treating him as broken. So I don't see that as bad. But like, I like that take much more, that he was chosen because his mind is fragmented and he's an easier target for this outward being, which is where the powers are coming from, rather than randomly having an altar with superpowers. So one of the final scenes, if not the final scene in the second episode, is what really won me over so far as to having a positive view on this show at the moment. And that was a conversation between Mark and Steven. And it was the first time that Steven was inside. He was internal. Mark was in control of the body, and they were actively communicating through a mirror. First of all, mirrors and DID, super weird. We personally don't really have communication that happens through mirrors, but there definitely is a lot of internal reflection and recognition of the DID when you look in a mirror, because you're seeing a body that's not your own, unless you identify with the body. I like that they chose that as a convention of how they communicate, because it kind of rings true as something that comes up in real life DID. And in this conversation, it got really real, and it got, I don't want to say triggering, but like it did trigger a real response from me of, like, that's a part of us, and that's a part of our system that no one has ever seen. Like, the people who are closest to us, the people who know our system the best, don't see that, because it's so personal and so private and feels really wrong and feels like a failure in healing and in communication and in acceptance. And it's really hard for us to accept and admit and show those parts. But there's this conversation between them of Steven calling him a parasite who's like eating away at his life and like stealing his body. I don't remember the exact terminology, but it's a really intense scene where they're fighting, and Mark ends up kicking a mirror in, and it's like building with all this music and stuff, and then I believe the music cuts out right before Mark smashes the mirror and it zooms out, so you're kind of seeing him from the outside and like seeing this guy who just went mad and started kicking a mirror randomly in the middle of a park. And that's a lot of the times how it feels, is just that fight internally getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and then exploding, and then you're like, I look insane to everyone around me. Like, if anyone ever sees this, I'm going to be committed to a mental institution. Like, so much stuff happening internally and having it come from an external place. And that's something I'm actually realizing just as I'm saying this, that the monsters in this show are visible only to him and not to the other people, which is very powerful when it comes to DID. Because there's so many people and so many influences that are internal that are strongly influencing you, that external people just can't see, but then they see your reactions to them, and then they think you're crazy. So I think it captures a lot of fears that surround DID and surround not necessarily people on the outside, not necessarily fears that people have towards people who have DID, but fears that you have when you have DID, which is not representation that we all often see in media. Usually the scary thing that they play on is, ooh, what if you're around this person and who do you think is going to come out? Like, what will they do to you? And that's the really fucked up piece of representation. And that's the, oh yeah, who's the serial killer alter? But this feels much more like, when you have it, what are the fears there of losing control? To conclude, that one scene with the mirror and the smashing in, like, I don't think I've ever seen anything that I had that kind of reaction to in media relating to this disorder. So that was really powerful, and that really affected my feelings towards this show so far. And I'm feeling hopeful, cautiously hopeful right now, but much more cautiously hopeful than I was. My expectations were underground before watching this at all. Another piece is, it's just really interesting seeing Stephen and Mark start to communicate. And like, Mark had the line where he was like, I don't know, but something's shifted lately, and you always had this wall up between us, and now that's coming down. Something's changed and we can communicate more. I don't know. And now Stephen like can actually experience being inside and seeing what's happening externally when Mark is in the body. And there's a conversation they have, and like the second, so Stephen didn't know what was going on. He just thought like something happens and I sleepwalk or I get possessed or what. He still hasn't figured it out, but at least not fully. He's in the process. But now that he knows that Mark has hurt people when he's been out, Stephen does not want to give him control. And it's not just from a place of blame. At least it doesn't seem to be so far, which is something that I'm really interested to see what they do with moving forward. It was the line when they were talking, and I think it was in that mirror scene, actually, when they were talking about like how Mark has hurt people, and he was kind of giving little hints as to why he does what he does, and he's like paying a debt and he's trying to protect people, whatever. And he talked about like, I have to do things that end up with me covered in blood. And Stephen was like, yeah, and that blood is on my hands. And yeah, that could have just been like being like, but we share a body, dude. But it felt like a first touch on system responsibility, which I'm curious to see where they go with that, because that's such a huge thing with DID, is that it doesn't matter if you have amnesia. It doesn't matter if that was someone completely different, if you would never do the thing that an alter in your system did. You have to take responsibility for the actions your body causes. You can't exist in this world with DID and not take that responsibility. And that's such a huge thing in healing and in acceptance and in working together. So it's nice to see them start having those conversations already and start figuring out how to work together, work around each other. And so far I'm feeling good. Little other things that stood out as little DID things. So from the first episode, like Stephen randomly having a date with this girl and being like, wait, what? Who are you? When did, what? It's just very real. But then additionally from that, like the types of issues that can cause of like then Stephen meeting Layla and realizing Mark is married, okay. And then like having his own opinions on how Mark treats Layla. And I'm curious if it'll come up that like Mark got him this date with this other woman, and will Stephen interfere in their marriage, trying to like, was that for a reason that he got that date? Will Stephen make issues for Mark's relationship because he didn't know about the reason that Mark was doing this, because it was whatever. In a system, you don't have privacy. You don't have secrets. And it'll be interesting to see how Stephen learning Mark's secrets is going to affect Mark's life and the things that he has been kind of living in comfort of Stephen being unaware of. So another thing is Khonshu, the ancient Egyptian god, the way he interacts with Stephen and the way that Stephen perceives his presence, while Khonshu himself is not actually an altar in their system so far as we know, and so far as our current understanding is, that like looming bigger presence that will like come up behind him and like flash in and out of his awareness, and that has this like echoing, resounding voice, is very reminiscent of what it feels like when there is someone's presence nearby and you don't know and you can't even really perceive that it's necessarily someone else that's affecting you. It just feels like an external huge question mark of a threat. I don't experience that as much as some others in our system do, Puffin in particular. But I have heard enough about that and had enough bits of memory sharing to understand that that was a very good representation of it. Of that, just that, like, it feels like, while it might just be a light, like, kind of flickering, like electricity does, suddenly it feels like the lights are flashing, and while, like, someone might have just walked across the floor in the other room, it sounds like there's, like, booming going on, and it feels like there's this thing hunched over your shoulders and all that. That was just a interesting representation of that, whether it was intended to be or not. So another thing that's interesting is, like, we saw in the scene where he was looking for his storage locker, him go in and talk to the receptionist and be like, I'm looking for a storage locker. It's under Stephen Grant. If it's not under Stephen Grant, it might be under Mark. I don't know the last name. And the way that he keeps hearing people refer to him as Mark and all of this stuff, and just understanding that discomfort and that feeling of having to talk to a stranger and having to kind of say these things that you're like, you're gonna question me so much on this. This is gonna seem so sketch to you, and I don't have an answer to you that's gonna make you feel more comfortable. I don't know what to say. Let's just try to do it. Was just kind of relatable and funny, but then the fact that, like, he goes through all this stuff and has so many people, like, his whole conversation with Layla, her, like, continuously being like, Mark, drop the accent, like, talk to me, Mark, and continuously referring to him as that, and all this stuff getting crazy and out of hand, and all these, like, fight scenes and chase scenes, and then she calls him Stephen, and he's able to, like, settle and focus for a second, and everything grounds for a second, and then he's able to move forward and, like, take action. It's just a powerful little moment of him coming to terms with the fact that there's someone else there, that he has to accept this Mark, but then it getting really overwhelming and him just needing that reassurance that he's real too, and that he's there, and that he's Stephen, and that he'll be seen for that. Thank you guys so much. Sorry, I think this video is going to be all over the place because I talked on it. I recorded this very stream of consciously and very messily, and I'm going to do my best to edit it together in a way that makes sense and is a little bit more linear. But yeah, I will make more videos coming up, or at least someone in our system will, hopefully, on the other episodes as it goes. And I'm feeling cautiously hopeful about this. Obviously, it's not the non-violent representation we would like to see in media, but it is a different representation, and it is focusing more on the experience of DID rather than the outward fear of DID, like from the outside in. So, we'll see. Bye, guys.